All right. Well, hello and welcome everyone to the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire's live event. This is our sixth installment of our online programs, and we are so happy you have decided to join us this afternoon. And for those of you who are watching on the replay, we are excited that you have the opportunity to engage with the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire programs in this format. It certainly has been a trying time across the country and the world. Not only are we all worried about the COVID-19 pandemic, we're now seeing protests over the murder of George Floyd. It's times like these that the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire reaffirms our commitment to dialogue that promotes a more peaceful world. It is a world where there should be no room for racism and bigotry, and we hope that our programming continues to create space for understanding between countries, cultures, and communities. For those of you who do not yet know, my name is Tim Horgan, and I am the Executive Director of the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan membership organization dedicated to helping people better understand the complex global issues that we are facing today. Of course, the coronavirus pandemic is one of the biggest stories of the day, but there are many other issues that have not disappeared just because the focus of the world is elsewhere. In fact, it is more important than ever that people understand these complex global issues so that governments cannot gloss over them. That is what the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire is here for, and why we have committed to continuing to bring timely online programs to the global community. As a membership organization, the Council is supported by a generous community of global citizens. These programs are made possible by these members and donors, ensuring the Council's work can continue. We thank and appreciate everyone who assists the Council and hope that if you are not yet a member, you will consider joining or donating to help keep these programs alive. You can find more information on our membership here on our website, or make a tax-deductible contribution to the organization by texting WACNH to 44-321. Your generosity and help is greatly appreciated. We'd also like to thank our great sponsors who have made these past 6 events possible. Thank you to the John Bickford Foundation, Charles and Barbara Bickford, Stephen and Karen Barndollar, as well as Helen Taft and Peter Bowman. You are all wonderful supporters, and we thank you for all you have done to help make this series a success. In addition, we would like to thank our mission partner, Southern New Hampshire University, for all the support that they have provided over the past 20 years. The Council is stronger for your assistance. Also, as a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, the Council does not promote a political position, party, issue, or candidate. We are here to provide a platform for discussion and hope you will draw your own conclusions from the information presented here today. Therefore, the content of tonight's program contains the views of the speaker and do not necessarily represent those of the Council, its board of directors, staff, sponsors, or members. For those who it is their first time watching one of these events, welcome. We will be taking questions throughout the night, so please do send us your queries so we can have a full and robust discussion after the presentation. You can send your questions to our email address at council@wacnh.org, or send them to our social media accounts, which you see here. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker for tonight, our first truly international speaker, as he joins us from Prague, Czech Republic. Dr. Martin Nekola received his doctorate in political science from Charles University in Prague, Czech Republic. His research focused on non-democratic regimes, the era of communism, Czech communities abroad, and the East European anti-communist exiles in the USA during the Cold War. From time to time, he participates in the election observation missions organized by the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. He is a member of the Association for Slavic East European and Eurasian Studies. and the Czechoslovak Genealogical Society International. He is also the author of more than 300 articles and has published 12 books. He is finally the coordinator of the Czechoslovak Talks project. I would now like to invite Martin into the conversation.
Good evening from Prague. It is my pleasure to talk for World Affairs Council of New Hampshire. I'm sorry I can't be with you tonight, but I hope I'll have a chance to visit Manchester and Concord soon and to take a selfie in front of your state capitol with the Golden Dome. It's kind of cool. I will focus my today's lecture specifically on the Czech Republic, or Czechia, the country I come from. Thanks to its strategic position right in the heart of Europe, it has always been a meeting point, a center of business and culture, and a place where the West met the East. Today, it has one of the lowest unemployment rates in Europe. Its economy is growing. The quality of life is very high, but still, we Czechs have been labeled troublemakers and inner opposition within the European Union because of our resistance to the plan for receiving refugees from Middle East and Africa in past few years, and our lukewarm approach towards further integration of the European Union. A general tension within the EU, which has lasted for some years now, has also led to the rise of populism, one of the very serious threats to liberal democracy. So I would like to talk about these topics. Let me begin with a very brief introduction. The Czech Republic is a parliamentary democracy. Its supremo is the Constitution of the Czech Republic, together with the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms. In its current form, the Constitution has been valid since January the 1st, 1993, since the date the independent Czech state was established as a result of the separation of Czechoslovakia into two parts. And Václav Havel, you probably know, became our first head of state. The power is divided between the legislative, meaning the Czech parliament, executive, Czech government and the president, and judicial power. Legislative power in the Czech Republic is represented by the parliament, which is consisted of the House of Deputies, the lower house, and the Senate, the upper house. The House of Deputies is made up of 200 deputies elected on party tickets by secret ballot based on proportional representation for 4-year terms. The Senate has 81 senators elected in individual electoral districts for 6-year terms using a majority wins 2-round system. Every citizen, upon reaching the age of 18, has a right to vote, and you can be elected to the Chamber of Deputies if you are at least 21. But to be eligible for the Senate, you have to be at least 40. The President of the Czech Republic is the formal head of state and also Commander-in-Chief of the armed forces. And since the foundation of the independent Czechoslovak state back in 1918, the President has had a strong authority and position. This tradition of Czechoslovak and later Czech presidents and the symbolism connected with this role has always eluded the logic of a parliamentary system. The Czech prime ministers have always had to deal with the presidents who sometimes exceeded the limits of their constitutional powers. Since 2013, Czechs have had direct presidential elections, and the candidates are elected by the people. The previous presidents had been chosen by both chambers of the parliament at a unique common assembly. The strong position of Czech head of state has now been enhanced, and the president has won his own legitimacy from the citizens themselves, not indirectly through their representatives in the parliament. And our current president, Miloš Zeman, re-elected in January 2018 for his second 5-year term, knows very well actually how to use this power for his own benefit. during political crisis, tensions in the political scene, and the varying directions of the Czech foreign policy. Unfortunately, our President Zeman is also a leading representative of a wave of populism we are currently dealing with. I will talk about it a bit later. Yeah, this is our president with your great supreme leader. Let me emphasize, this is a real picture, not a picture taken in the Vox Museum. Anyway, the head of Czech government, the prime minister, who depends on the majority in the Chamber of Deputies, has always faced the fact that the president is de facto beyond recall, and that the office of the president itself enjoys high prestige. From time to time, the president intervened with the powers of the government, and above all, he tried to direct his own autonomous foreign policy, sometimes contradictory to the one the government had agreed on. This led to doubts, conflicts, and different approaches to foreign partners, meaning the European Union, Russia, China, the United States, of course, and thus to a strange state of affairs in the Czech Republic. We had the last parliamentary election in October 2017, which brought an increase in power to 3 protest on or anti-establishment parties. The ultra-liberal leftist Pirate Party, then the anti-European party called Freedom and Direct Democracy, SPD, and ANO movement. ANO means yes in the Czech language, but it's also an abbreviation of the actions of dissatisfied citizens. This movement was founded by billionaire Andrej Babiš, the second wealthiest man in the Republic. Also a man surrounded by multiple corruption scandals, but ANO movement won the election by a large margin, and he became the prime minister. Mr. Babiš is actually a very interesting case. The red cap inspiration is obvious. It says Silné Česko, or strong Czechia. He was born in Slovakia, and in 1990s he founded a conglomerate called Agrofert that operates in the fields such as agriculture, logistics, energy, chemical industry, forestry, etc., etc. And today, about 230 companies are covered by the umbrella trademark Agrofert, worth of $4 billion. It's a nice family company, right? Andrej Babiš decided to enter the politics in 2011, claiming the traditional Czech political parties did not do a good job in ruling the country. He mainly criticized the corruption affairs that were, in his opinion, much more frequent and worse than in the Western countries. After he stepped into political arena, many political scientists use the term Berlusconization of the politics, named after Silvio Berlusconi, Italian prime minister, who also established his own party. He owned the biggest media in Italy and dominated the public space. And Babiš followed his steps. He bought 2 largest daily periodicals. He bought a radio station, TV channel, and he's using them very effectively to influence the public opinion. His marketing team prepared a smart face-to-face campaign in the streets before the elections. Sometimes it looked like Babiš was everywhere. He handed out donuts at the subway stations in Prague. He was visiting regions with mobile booths with fried chicken. He was meeting the people and presented promises of higher wages, pensions, and benefits for various groups of the population. He devoted an incredible amount of time and energy to the campaign, and it was worth to him. I will come back to Mr. Babiš later. The Czech Republic, also officially called Czechia, is, as you know, a very small country in Central Europe with 10.5 million inhabitants, with its economy strongly tied to the larger German economy, and with most of its foreign trade with other member countries of the European Union. Czechia has been a stable member of the EU since May 2004, and there is no real alternative for us than a deepening integration with the European Union. However, Euroscepticism has dramatically increased in the past few years. What does the term actually mean? Euroscepticism entered political discourse in the middle of 1990s. Initially, it was almost exclusively used as an expression which focused on all kinds of opposition, criticism, and negative attitudes towards the European Union and the progress of European integration. In many cases, Euroscepticism was subjective and vague in meaning, lacking any proper framework, and it attracted primarily less educated and less politically knowledgeable individuals. This has changed in recent years. Public opinion about the EU is now playing a major role when considering membership of each state in the community. The revision of the treaties on which the EU is based and the enlargement of the European Union. We usually distinguish between hard and soft Euroscepticism. Hard Eurosceptics or hard Euroscepticism refers to a complete of EU membership, hand in hand with the rejection of NATO. Whereas soft Eurosceptics support only limited EU membership. But they are critical of various aspects of integration, such as the cross-border movement of people, adoption of the common currency euro. By the way, the Czech currency koruna or Czech crown is still our currency in the Czech Republic. Or they are also critical to giving up powers and responsibilities of the local, meaning state government, in favor of supranational leadership in Brussels, meaning the European Commission, the European Parliament, and other EU institutions. The current situation in the Czech Republic in many ways reflects the past. While they are not directly under the rule of another power, many Czechs feel dominated by larger EU nations. This is especially true of Germany, as the Czechs already have negative historical associations with Germanic peoples who dominate now the EU decision making. Let me just remind you that the Czech lands were under the direct German/Austrian rule for more than 300 years. So many Czechs see their national identity as having been defined from the outside. Criticism of the EU brings up this historical threat to our national sovereignty, the three historical periods in which the Czech lands were under the rule of foreign power, and the Czechs as a nation had to make concessions to survive. The three periods, meaning the long period under the Habsburg dynasty and Austrian Empire, we were part of it between 1620 and 1918 to the end of World War I. Then the Nazi occupation during the World War II, and Soviet supremacy between 1948 and 1989, while after August 1968 it was a direct military occupation. So this is reflected in many criticisms of the EU that depict the Czech Republic as a pawn controlled by the West. Thus, the EU encroachment on domestic issues is seen by many Czechs as a clear evidence of foreign rule. There is a feeling of a lost sovereignty as a result of the EU membership. Euroscepticism symbolically reasserts a lost autonomy. By its very definition, membership means that any member state will have to give up certain aspects of self-governance in order to fully participate in the European project. Eurosceptics are able to tap into these nationalistic sentiments in order to gain support for their cause, whether or not the loss of sovereignty is real or just imagined. There are many factors that may influence the growth of Euroscepticism, but one of the most significant is the expansion of the EU's authority into domestic matters. Critics have said that there is a democratic deficit in the governing of the European Union. The decision-making processes in Brussels are too distant, too strange, and complicated, that the EU leaders are not responsible for their decisions to Czech voters and the Czech public. The elections to the European Parliament, held every 5 years, have almost no consequence and are treated with indifference. The Czech Republic has 21 seats out of 751 in the EU Parliament, and the turnout at the EU elections in May 2014, 6 years ago, was only 19%, less than 1/5 of all eligible voters. This was, in fact, the second lowest turnout among all EU states. I think the lowest one was in Slovakia. The turnout in the last EU election in May 2019 was 9 or 10% higher, above all thanks to the younger generations and first-time voters. But the deepening crisis is still visible. The EU bureaucracy, inefficiency, disrespect towards the opinions, feelings, and needs of the people in the member states, and the fact that European law overrides the Czech constitution and the Czech laws in many cases have been criticized by all parties across the Czech political scene for the past 15 years. But recently, there have been two issues that made Euroscepticism a mainstream, a serious burning topic on a daily basis. Topic number one, of course, Brexit. In the referendum in Great Britain held on June 23rd, 2016, 51.9% of electorate voted to leave the EU. That was a shattering blow. Although there were debates about setting up a new referendum and about the repeal of the results of the first one, today Brexit is a reality, and United Kingdom finally left the EU on February the 1st. You have been watching the news, so you know that the whole Brexit process lasted forever and it was very, very complicated. No one expected the results of the British referendum, and it was a clear warning to the EU elites that the Union needed immediate reforms. I think that the Czech Republic should be in the middle of these changes for the better and building of a new EU vision, because it's a win-win solution for everyone. We can show that we are creative, active, respectful of our partners, and not merely the ones who criticize constantly or who don't care, who sit in the back, let the others to do the work, and shout only when we don't like something. Some EU critics among Czech politicians called for a similar referendum, preferably leading to a Czechzit. But I think it's highly unlikely because, as mentioned, there is no other alternative than the EU, and the Czechs benefit greatly from the European single market and the EU structural and investment funds. We have actually drawn billions of euros from these arrangements in the past 16, 15 years of our membership. So that we could build highways and roads, protect the environment, renovate cities, modernize industry, allow our students to get university degrees from prestigious Western European universities, etc., etc. And yet, more and more people are calling for Czechzit. But why? We are experiencing rapid economic growth. We have the lowest unemployment rate in Europe, and the quality of life is, in general, very high. So what the hell is happening to us? We have to look at this trend from a broader perspective and see that the rejection of the EU and the common European values is closely tied to populism. Populism, phenomenon of populism. Political parties lacking any ideological foundation and using populist appeals emerged in Central and Eastern Europe in general since the end of the 1990s. These parties did not adopt a radical ideology, although substituting for it an anti-political appeal, speaking in this case about the Czech Republic. Until 2010, 2011, populism was not a prominent element in Czech politics, meaning mostly political parties at the periphery of political spectrum used some populist rhetorics. Compared to other Central and Eastern European democracies, Czechia had one of the most stable and relatively closed party systems, and it was characterized by almost exclusive unidimensional competition. There was one leftist party, the main leftist party, Social Democracy, and then the right-wingers, Civic Democrats. But then the new generation of voters grew up, and these seem to be characterized by a lower level of identification with traditional left-wing, centrist, or right-wing parties, and the tendency to be attracted instead by simplified populist promises, and therefore to be linked with the protest or anti-establishment parties and movements. These political entities usually divide society into two antagonist groups, the pure people versus the corrupt elites. They argue that politics should be an expression of the general will of the people. They emphasize real or just imaginary crisis or threat. They claim to speak for the good and honest people and attack the out-of-touch elites. You certainly remember that your president has often used the claim draining the swamp in DC during his campaign. Furthermore, it is often problematic to identify the parties and movements on the left-wing or right-wing political spectrum, because often they combine elements from both ends of the spectrum, plus the populist language and rhetoric. There is also a very important role of charismatic leaders or rhetorical features such as tabloid style, dramatization, and the use of social media to spread the fake news. If you take a look at populism from the European perspective, we see that populists have established themselves as powerful political forces and have become integral members of coalition governments. In Italy, in Denmark, in Sweden, in Finland, in Germany, the Alternative für Deutschland or the Alternative for Germany, all these parties were exponentially growing in the past few years. The Czech Republic, Poland, Hungary, and Slovakia, 4 countries in Central Europe, maintain closer relations than with the rest of the European Union through a local alliance called V4 or Visegrad 4. In recent years, each one of them has had to deal with increasing populism, more or less connected with negativism, focused either on corruption, the heritage of communism, dissatisfaction with developments after the fall of the Iron Curtain, and the transition to democracy. And again, the European Union factor plays a role. National interests versus some Brussels directives. People from the countries of the former Soviet bloc are actually very sensitive about pressure from outside. I have already talked about the feeling of a German dominance that many Czechs share, but there is another similar comparison. For more than 40 years, following the end of World War II, the communist regimes of Central Europe, including the one in Czechoslovakia, received strategic decisions from Moscow alone. Official propaganda talked about the Soviets as liberators, protectors, the greatest friends, equal partners, but in fact, the countries in Eastern Europe were nothing more than satellites and subordinated vassals to the Soviet Union. We called these regimes people's democracies that were far from any participation or involvement of their citizens in decision making. Officially, the nation fully supported the communist government in its endeavors. In fact, the majority of the population hated it or became apolitical and just didn't care. And that nicely depicts the widespread mood in Czechoslovak society in, let's say, the late 1980s, when the rulers were so distant from their dominated citizens, and the whole communist regime was just a rotten castle falling apart day by day. And so the current relations and the, let's say, abyss of misunderstanding between Brussels, meaning the European elites, the European leaders, and the individual member countries and their citizens sometimes remind the old times before the fall of the Iron Curtain, the fall of communism in 1989. Another issue that revealed Czech, Slovak, Polish, and Hungarian dissatisfaction with the EU has been the so-called European refugee crisis. This is a term given to a period beginning in 2015, when rising numbers of people, about 2 million so far, arrived in the European Union, traveling across the Mediterranean Sea or overland through southeastern Europe. These people included asylum seekers from the countries hit by an armed conflict, Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, but also others, such as economic migrants from Black Africa and Southeastern Asia. And even some hostile agents, including Islamic State militants, disguised as refugees. Although most of these people headed to Germany, Great Britain, or Sweden, which showed the most open, welcoming policy, the European Union, in attempt to deal with the mass migration influx, decided on a mandatory quota for relocation of asylum seekers for all member states. The Czech Republic was required to accept, on basis of these quotas, about 3,000 refugees, 3,500. Our government reacted with strong disapproval to these decisions from Brussels, and the European Union, instead of dialogue, threatened the V4 countries with punishment for their disobedience, obstruction, and lack of solidarity. In late 2017, the European Union stated that member states who refused the participation in the quota system could be expected to pay the sum of 250,000 euros, about 290,000 US dollars, for each assigned asylum seeker they refuse. Even today, the Czech Republic still plays the role of the most radical EU member, as the government and the majority of our people would rather stay completely untouched by the influx of non-European foreigners, mostly from Africa and Middle East. Some politicians have repeatedly warned the public against this unreasonable xenophobia and hatred for Muslims, while President Miloš Zeman emphasizes issues such as the spread of infectious disease, terrorism, and the formation of ghettos and isolated Muslim communities as a consequence of accepting refugees. You know, today it's the power of media that shapes the views of the public on various issues. And the images from London, Brussels, Paris, Berlin, and other cities in Western Europe hit by terrorist attacks in recent years really don't help to promote objective approach of this refugee crisis. Rather than that scenario, unfortunately, the debate has centered on populist statements, partial, radical, short-term solutions, and calling for an isolationist approach towards the European Union. You know that the Prime Minister of Hungary for past 10 years is Viktor Orbán, who is successfully building a semi-autocratic regime, suppressing his opposition and the independent press. And he also represents the populist and nationalist wing of European leaders. And he's openly challenging his liberal opponents to a political duel for the future of the entire European Union. Viktor Orbán has also a strong ally in the Polish ultra-conservative party Law and Justice, It's a ruling party in Poland since 2015. In October last year, I guess, it won another parliamentary election, gaining 43% of voters' support, and it's pretty much the same story as in Hungary. The government formed by the party Law and Justice and led by Mateusz Morawiecki is trying to subdue an independent judiciary, the Polish media, and to isolate the opposition parties. So seeing this from a broader perspective, liberal democracy pursued for almost 3 decades after the fall of the Iron Curtain is in retreat in Central Europe. And populist leaders with some autocratic tendencies try to spread the belief that the European Union doesn't offer effective solutions to the problems of the current world anymore. And the European Union's leading states, Germany and France, personified by Chancellor Angela Merkel and President Emmanuel Macron, are considered more as opponents and intruders intervening in internal matters than as partners and friends, unfortunately. Our president, Miloš Zeman, is a very experienced politician. He was a prime minister for the leftist Social Democratic Party back in 1990s. And he has evolved into a strange prototype of far-right wing populist politician too. He often speaks about the media massage. He blames the media for dividing society and widening the gap between the public majority and the elites. And he's using the word elites in a very strongly pejorative connotation. With this rhetoric, he can reach out to his many sympathizers, and he perfectly fits into the category of some political analysts say that also the Czech Republic might be pulled down into the vortex and move towards some totalitarian quasi-democracy. With the oligarch billionaire as a prime minister and the president playing with the constitution as it suits him, this unpleasant image might be indeed close to reality in the near future. On the other hand, there is always some light at the end of the tunnel, right? Growing vigilance against cheap populist rhetoric, growing interest in public affairs, political literacy, and political participation starting from the bottom, meaning from the local municipal level. All these I see as promising proof that the civic society and control mechanisms are still strong. But the journey might be long. A significant part of the Czech population is actually against Prime Minister Babiš and the powerful supremacy of his ANO movement and the Agrofert conglomerate, which Babiš still currently controls. In June 2019, we saw a large protest in Prague, actually the largest one since the fall of communism 30 years ago, with an estimated 250,000 participants, demanding the resignation of Babiš. That hasn't happened yet. And surprisingly, the protest didn't much affect the voters' support for our movement. Let me show you 4 charts. The first one, the real election results from October 2017, and then the models based on the public opinion surveys during the past 3 years. And as you can see, ANO movement still shows up as the strongest political party, with support between 30 and 35%. In January and February of this year, the European Union warned that the Czech Prime Minister Babiš might have a conflict of interest. Yay, what a surprise. And the European Parliament's Budgetary Control Committee called on Babiš to stand down as Prime Minister or to sell his Agrofert business, and it also stated that Agrofert should not receive EU funds until the issue is resolved. And it also recommended to Czech authorities to be more proactive in tackling fraud, corruption, and tax crimes. The reaction of Andrej Babiš was a sharp refusal of interference in Czech internal affairs, and he accused all Czech officials of the European Parliament who also participated in this investigation of being rats, traitors, and denunciators. In addition, he promised his government would produce another massive investment in infrastructure, healthcare, and education. So while younger and urban supporters of liberal democracy say the European investigation proves that the populist prime minister is a criminal and an authoritarian, most people in the provinces still believe his claims that the charges have been cooked up by the political elite he has ousted. A big fight on the political scene was expected, but something has suddenly changed everyone's plans. Yes, coronavirus. A 30-day state of emergency was declared on March 12th, and it lasted until May 17th. Schools, businesses, shops, with the exception of pharmacies and grocery stores, were closed. The same with borders and airports. All persons had to wear the face masks while outside of their place of residence, and the whole set of other restrictive measures was adopted. Naturally, in the crisis of this magnitude, all other problems, including the investigation of Babiš, retreated into the background. The government now acts as a crisis manager, and Andrej Babiš claims the measures were necessary and saved people's lives. As we speak, there are about 9,200 infected and 325 deaths in Czechia. And Babiš also claimed that only he has the best plan for the recovery of the economy. So I believe we currently stand at the dawn of a new phase of populism, unfulfillable promises, and deceiving voters. In May, just a few weeks ago, there was supposed to be a big international conference on populism in Prague, but it was cancelled for obvious reasons. So our next parliamentary election is scheduled on October 2021, and we'll see what happens until then. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Martin, for that wonderful presentation. We'll jump right into the questions and try and get through as many of them as we can here today. Our first one comes from Dino Buenviaje. How successful are the opposition parties in checking populism in the Czech Republic?
Well, let me show you the charts again. There is a big gap between the leading ANO party or the ANO movement and the Civic Democrats or the Pirate Party. It's about 15%. So now the opposition doesn't really know what to do next because Babiš, his rhetoric is still so strong and the people still believe it. I don't know how it's possible, but the opposition stands on the same place. They don't know what to do, and they just have to support the steps of the government dealing with the coronavirus and trying to recover the economy. So try to ask me this question later this year. Maybe I'll have more precise answers. Sorry.
All right, our next question is, what policies does ANO stand for, if anything really, and where does their support come from?
Well, it's interesting. As I said, ANO movement entered the Czech political scene in 2013-14, and it has strong support in larger cities, in the regions. They dominated in the Senate elections, in the regional elections, in the municipal elections, in the parliamentary elections. So, it suddenly looked up that ANO brought some new topics and that they can solve all the issues and all the problems. I don't really know. we say that Babiš just bribed the seniors and the less educated classes of the population with the donuts he was handing out at the subway stations and the bus stops, and that everyone is just satisfied because they got a few more hundreds of their pensions. But I don't think that the Czech voters are so stupid. When I was watching the development of the Czech political scene in past 30 years, I see that there was always a boom of one and a strong support for one party. Once the Civic Democrats won all the elections, 2 years later it was the Social Democrats, then it was the rise of influence of the other party and other parties. I don't know what happens next. Let's wait for the next parliamentary election next October.
Okay. And speaking of the Czech voters, what steps need to be taken to show voters that populism is not a solution to the problem and usually makes things worse?
Well, you have to educate the people, you have to talk to the people, you have to moderate the discussion. You see it in the US as well. You have only two major political parties, and it's not very easy, to get to some conclusion and to the compromise. So it's the same here. The people, the voters and supporters of Babiš, they really adore him. They think that all the charges is just fake and it's just a campaign of his opponents, and you simply cannot, explain what's wrong. Why the second wealthiest man shouldn't be a prime minister, why he shouldn't secretly own the Agrofert conglomerate. There is a conflict of interest. That there is there's a dominance of one party. We just have to wait. We have to. I rely on the first-time voters and on younger generations because they are not so heavily tied with political ideologies and with the political parties, but they think. They are connected with the world. They are using social media, and I think they can defend themselves. They don't believe the populist rhetorics as the old generations.
All right, our next question coming in. Can some of the EU's current issues and widespread feelings of democratic deficit be traced back to its enlargement in July of 2004, making decisions more difficult by adding many more voting members?
Yeah. In 2004, next to the Czech Republic, another 9 countries joined the EU. In 2007, it was Romania and Bulgaria. So currently, the whole Eastern and Southeastern Europe joined the common European project, and they were not prepared. The Czech voters just understood that if we join the EU, we become wealthier, we become part of the Western structures we wanted to be for past 50 years since the end of the World War II, but they didn't see behind the corner that it also brings some responsibility. That European membership is not just getting the money, the investment funds, but that we also need to share the European values, and that we also need to help to make the European Union better. I think that some politicians still don't understand it, even 50 years after we joined the EU. And I guess it's the same in Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, and other countries. Our first president, the founder of the Czechoslovak Republic in 1918, Professor Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk, said that we, as a Czech nation, as a Czech state, would need about 50 years of some calm development, without any wars, without any revolutions, without any social changes. So now we are, 30 years after the fall of the communism, 15 years after we joined the European Union. So let's give us some time. You Americans had a chance to develop your democracy for past 300 years, 200 years. So.
Yeah, we certainly see that with a lot of our international visitors that we bring in, is that our democracy is not perfect at all, but has had a few more years to figure things out. All right, our next question comes in again about the EU. Can the EU begin reforms that would provide more autonomy to local governments, or would that threaten the cohesion of the bloc?
Yeah, that's the question. We have the Lisbon Agreement, which is kind of a European constitution, and I think it's the time to discuss about some reform of this constitution and of the laws, how the European Union works. Because after Brexit, we are in a new reality, and we actually don't know what's happening behind the scenes because the UK left the European Union in February. Since March, we have this coronavirus crisis. So maybe when we wake up, after the summer, we'll see how it affected the European Union that the United Kingdom left. We were lucky that Great Britain was a strong player in the European Union, and that Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary could rely on the British in terms of defending from the German/French dominance. But now this strong player is out, so we'll see. You probably heard that Angela Merkel and President Macron try to think about the European future and about how to deal with the coronavirus crisis. But again, I don't think that will work, because if this solution and these ideas come only from Germany and France, the rest of the EU won't like it.
All right. Again, about the EU, how affected was the Czech Republic by the euro crisis, and are the ripple effects still felt from it in the country, kind of like the effects of austerity measures are being still felt in the UK policies?
Yeah, we still have our currency, the Czech koruna. €1 is about 25 Czech korunas, and as I say, our economic situation was pretty good even after 2009 and after the Greek crisis a few years ago. So I'm not an economist, so I don't know the details. But again, the political scene is divided. Some experts say that we should adopt the euro because even Slovaks have it, and all other neighboring countries have the EU, so that it would help the business and the European common market. On the other hand, they say the Czech koruna is still kind of an abandoned island of our sovereignty. If we keep the Czech koruna, it will help us for the future. And they say that the Greek crisis, all the economic problems Italy, Portugal, Spain, and France dealt with in the past few years, there's a clear evidence of that we should keep the koruna. But for Americans, if you come to Prague or other Czech cities, when you will be able to fly, you'll find out that the Czech Republic is still very cheap for you. We are beer drinkers, so you will spend just peanuts for many beers, and you can have a good time. It's still a pleasant country for the visitors from the West. And maybe of course, Prague, now is one of the most expensive European cities compared to Vienna or even to Berlin. It's really, very expensive to live here. But it might get worse if we adopt Europe. I don't know.
Yeah, my wife and I did our honeymoon in Prague as well as Vienna, and we loved it there. It's a beautiful city. I would highly suggest anybody who has the opportunity to go. The food is amazing, and as you mentioned, very cheap. We had some amazing meals. I think the first one we had was in the old town square with some street vendors getting a pork knuckle that was probably about that big for US $4. So it's an amazing place, and I highly recommend anybody who has the opportunity to go.
Actually, now is the best time to visit Prague. Unfortunately, you can't do that, but Prague is now a ghost town. Well, not now, but like a month ago, it was incredible. No crowds of Chinese tourists. The Charles Bridge, the old town square, and all places in the old town Prague. It was just amazing.
Yeah.
I was born in Prague. I was raised in Prague 1 district, which is the real downtown, and I don't remember the scenes and the panorama like I saw in the past few weeks. It was really great. Something like Times Square in New York, it was empty as well.
Yeah. All right. Our next question comes from Rex. You've spoken about some skepticism towards the EU, but what is the feeling of the Czech people about NATO and Czech membership in NATO?
I think it's something different. The Czechs understand that NATO is important for our protection. There is a big bear waiting in the east, and I think there is not such a strong rejection of the NATO membership than the EU. We don't have a border with Russia, which is a good thing. On the other hand, since 19th century, the Czech nation had some of feelings for the Russians, for the big Slavic brother, and in a tiny part of the population, this still remains. That Russians are our friends and brothers, and that we should not be, their enemies, and that we should not show the hostile approach, being part of the NATO structures. But I don't think it's significant.
John Sullivan asks, are you familiar with the work of Krostev in the Journal of Democracy? Do you agree with his view that the values of liberal democracy were never really adopted by Eastern Europeans?
I don't know this work, but yeah, I would agree, because after World War I, only Czechoslovakia was the liberal democratic regime in the whole Central European region. And we lost our sovereignty and our liberal democracy in 1938. Then the World War II came, and then this system was replaced by the people's democracies, meaning the communist regime. So, as I would come back to Masaryk words, that we didn't have the 20 years of calm development, of chance to enhance our liberal democracy. That might be true, and the other nations even didn't have these 20 years. So after 1989, we were in the economic and social and political transition, and the people were like kids. They didn't really know what the democracy was and what it meant. We were told that the communist regime was a people's democracy, but that was just a thing. So yes, I really hope the younger generations understand this, that freedom and democracy, it's not just a word, that it's a real value we need to protect.
All right, and our final question for the night comes from Steve Solomon. He's read that influential EU countries have undue influence on commerce. For example, regulations on tomatoes favor Dutch tomatoes over those from other countries. To what extent is that true, and how does it affect the Czech Republic?
Yeah, the populist parties show the Facebook posts and the tweets saying the European Union banned the Czech tomatoes because they were too small or too green, or you cannot buy bananas from Spain because they don't have the proper shape. It's probably true, but the people see, well, it's nonsense. Why the European Union has so many directives and so many laws and so many stupid ideas. But that's it. That the European Union feeling, it's so scattered. That there are so many problems and issues that the regular person who isn't a political scientist or a journalist or who don't really see behind the scenes, and they don't understand what's really happening in Brussels, and why do we need the European Parliament, and why do we need the European Commission. They only see these stars in the sky. Well, 2 small bananas, 2 green tomatoes. Well, then the result is that the whole European Union concept is a nonsense and idiotic. of course, after Brexit, the European Union also needs a deep reform, and because, as I say, some people call for a referendum leading to Czechit. There is a strong National Rally Party in France, and in other countries. This wave of populism is getting stronger. So let's really pray that in the next few years, the people will understand the importance of the common European project.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Nekola, for joining us tonight. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. I think it's probably around 10 o'clock your time. So we really appreciate the opportunity to hear from you, and thank you for answering so many questions. I also want to thank everyone here tonight for joining us, for watching this live, and for those who will be joining and watching on replay. We certainly appreciate your support, and we hope to see you at our next WACNH Live event, U.S.-Iran Relations and the Global Pandemic, with Paul Pilar of the Iran Project on June 16th, right here on the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire website. We hope you have enjoyed yourself, and we will see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you so much.
Thank you.